The rock, the cold wind howled over San Francisco Bay, slicing through the thick fog like a blade. In the distance, a fortress loomed, an island of concrete and steel, isolated from the world. This was Alcatraz, the most feared prison in America. Known as the Rock, it was said to be escape-proof. No man had ever broken out and lived to tell the tale. It was a place where the worst of the worst were sent to disappear. But in 1962, 3 men dared to challenge that belief. From the outside, Alcatraz was a monument to discipline and order. Guard towers dotted the island, their floodlights sweeping the yard at night like giant, unblinking eyes. Inside, cell blocks stood like iron tombs. The air reeked of bleach and despair. Guards barked orders, and prisoners moved in silence. To the world, this was a place of final punishment. But to Frank Morris, John Anglin, and Clarence Anglin, it was the beginning of a plan. A plan to do the impossible. Frank Morris was no ordinary criminal. He had a genius-level IQ and a lifetime of escapes behind him. The Anglin brothers were skilled thieves, hardened by years of crime. Together, they formed a team that would become legends. They weren't just trying to escape prison. They were trying to make history. Every day was a test of endurance. The guards watched every move. Conversations were short and careful. Trust was rare. But beneath the routine, something stirred. Whispers passed between cells. Glances held meaning. Slowly, a conspiracy took shape. They would not die in this prison. They would vanish. The idea was madness. Alcatraz was surrounded by freezing waters and strong currents. Even if someone made it off the island, they would have to survive a swim that most considered suicide. And yet, Frank Morris studied the tides, watched the guards, and counted the minutes. He didn't see a prison. He saw a puzzle. In their cells, the men worked quietly. Behind the walls, they carved holes with spoons and makeshift tools. They created false vents, hidden by cardboard and paint. At night, the sounds of scraping and tapping echoed through the silence. But no one noticed. The guards thought the prisoners were asleep. They built a raft from raincoats. Over 50 of them, carefully stitched together and hidden above the cell block. They crafted dummy heads from soap, toilet paper, and real hair, placed them on their pillows at night. Each move was calculated, each risk measured. One mistake, and it was over. The days turned into months. Pressure mounted. One wrong step would mean solitary confinement or worse. But they kept going. The dream of freedom burned brighter than fear. With every inch of tunnel and every patch of rubber, the plan came closer to reality. Then came June 11th, 1962, the night the Rock would be tested. The mastermind Frank Morris didn't look like a criminal genius. He was quiet, lean, and unassuming. But his eyes burned with intelligence. Born in Washington, D.C., and abandoned at a young age, he grew up in foster homes and juvenile facilities. Trouble found him early, but so did talent. Frank could break codes, crack safes, and disappear into crowds. By the time he reached Alcatraz, he had escaped from several prisons. But the Rock was unlike any place he had ever faced. Inside Alcatraz, Frank kept to himself. He read books, watched the routines of the guards, and studied the layout of the prison. He took mental notes of guard changes, timing, and weak points. new escape wasn't about strength. It was about patience, detail, and control. He became the center of a secret plan that would take months to complete. He found allies in the Anglin brothers. John and Clarence had grown up in Georgia and Michigan. They were inseparable, almost telepathic in their bond. Their past was filled with bank robberies and arrests, but they were also builders, swimmers, and quick thinkers. With Frank, they formed a triangle of skill, courage, and ambition. Frank had the vision. He saw how the plan could work. The air vents in their cells were corroded. Behind them was an unused service corridor. If they could break through, they would have access to an area the guards rarely checked. From there, the possibilities opened up. But first, they had to break the walls, literally. He organized the tools. Metal spoons smuggled from the mess hall, a drill made from a vacuum cleaner motor, and sharpened wood. They worked late at night, covering the sound with a stolen accordion. Each man had a role. Frank coordinated it all. He was calm, even when setbacks came. When other inmates mocked the plan, he ignored them. When guards passed by, he smiled politely. The dummy heads were his idea. He molded them with soap and used paint from the art room. Hair was taken from the barber shop. They looked eerily real, enough to fool a passing glance in the dim light. He practiced placing them just right on the pillow. Perfection mattered. He led by example. When others panicked, Frank stayed focused. He knew that fear was the enemy. He reminded the others of the goal, not just escape, but freedom. He believed they could make it. That belief became a shield against doubt. Every night, they chipped away at the wall. Every morning, they covered it back up. The holes grew, the raft inflated, and the countdown began. The night of the escape, Frank was ready. He tested the vent one last time. It opened. The tunnel was complete. The raft was packed. The tide was right. He looked at the dummy on his bed, then back at the hole in the wall. One last breath, and he crawled through. The brothers John and Clarence Anglin were more than brothers. They were best friends, allies, and co-conspirators. Born into a poor farming family, they grew up in tough times. Their childhood was filled with hard work, cold winters, and little comfort. But they had each other. That bond would carry them through every trial, including the greatest one of all. They began stealing in their teens. Small jobs at first, then banks. They never hurt anyone. They preferred slipping in and out without violence. Their criminal record grew, and so did their reputation. Eventually, they were caught and sent to prison. But the Anglins were slippery. Like Frank, they had escaped before. That made them a perfect fit for Alcatraz. At the Rock, they were placed in cells close to Frank Morris. It didn't take long for the three to connect. The brothers brought skills to the plan that Frank needed. Clarence was a skilled craftsman. John had a strong sense of timing and detail. Together, they became the muscle and the heart of the operation. The brothers dug through their cell walls night after night. It was slow, painful work. The salt in the air had weakened the concrete, but it still took months. They hid the debris in their pants, shaking it out in the yard. Every morning, they replaced the cardboard vent covers. Every night, they scraped. They helped sew the raft, using needle and thread stolen from the laundry room. The raft had to be watertight. One leak could mean death. The brothers tested the seams, blew air into the chambers, and reinforced the edges. It was crude, but it might just float. They memorized guard shifts and learned the sounds of the night. They grew bolder. One of them even managed to sneak up to the roof to scout the route. They took turns keeping watch while the others worked. They trusted no one else. Only the three of them knew the full plan. The brothers were driven by more than escape. They dreamed of going home. Their family still believed in them. They imagined holidays, sunlight, and the freedom of a world beyond bars. That dream made the long nights bearable. It gave them a reason to fight. When June 11th came, they were ready. John slipped through the hole in his cell. Clarence followed. Frank was waiting. Behind them, their dummy heads lay still, fooling the guards. Ahead of them, the roof and the water. The brothers exchanged a look. They were in this together, no matter what happened next. The escape, it was just after lights out when the prison fell into silence. Guards made their final rounds, checking cells and glancing over sleeping inmates. The dummy heads lay perfectly still on the pillows, eyes closed, mouths relaxed. In the dim glow of the corridor lights, they looked real enough to fool even a trained eye. Behind the cell walls, the real men moved quickly. Frank Morris slipped through his hole first, crawling into the service corridor. Dust coated everything, and the air was thick with old insulation. He waited, heart pounding, as John and Clarence Anglin followed. One by one, they emerged from the darkness, faces smeared with sweat and dirt. They carried their supplies in sacks, the homemade raft, paddles carved from plywood, and life vests made from raincoats. It was all makeshift and fragile, but it was all they had. Every step had to be silent. Any sound could alert a guard. Any wrong move could end it all. They climbed up the utility corridor toward the roof. Pipes clanged under their weight. The metal was slick with condensation. At the top, they used a stolen wrench to open a fan grate. It took precious minutes. Finally, the grate came loose, and they crawled out into the cold night. The roof stretched wide and bare. A single spotlight swept across the yard below. They crouched low, staying in the shadows. From up here, the prison looked like a cage built on rock. Beyond it, the bay shimmered under the moonlight. Freedom was close. They scaled a drainpipe down to the ground, landing behind the shower building. No guards in sight. They ran to the edge of the island, hearts racing. This was the final test. They unrolled the raft and began inflating it using a concertina fashioned into a pump. The rubber hissed, then ballooned. Time was slipping away. The tide was turning, and the wind was rising. They shoved the raft into the water and climbed in. The current pulled them instantly. They paddled with everything they had. Behind them, Alcatraz faded into the dark. No alarms sounded. No shots were fired. The night held its breath. They were gone. The discovery, the next morning, the sun rose over the bay like any other day. Fog still lingered on the water, and the guards at Alcatraz began their routine. It wasn't until the first bed check that something felt off. A guard tapped on Frank Morris's bars. No response. He called again, louder this time. Still nothing. Suspicious, He opened the door, and what he found would trigger one of the largest manhunts in American history. The head on Frank's pillow didn't move. The guard touched it, and it rolled to the floor. Soap, hair, and paint, not a real person. Panic surged through the cell block. One by one, they checked the Anglin brothers' cells. The same result. Dummy heads, empty beds, holes in the walls. Alarms blared. Guards swarmed the prison. Sirens echoed over the bay. Every tower scanned the shoreline. Boats were deployed. Helicopters chopped the sky. The prison went into lockdown. Warden Olin Blackwell was informed within minutes. He rushed to the scene, furious and stunned. No one had ever escaped Alcatraz like this. No one was supposed to. The FBI was called in immediately. Agents arrived and took over the investigation. They combed the cells, took photographs, collected the dummies, and crawled through the holes. They were shocked at the ingenuity. The raft, the tools, the disguises. It was a plan worthy of professionals. Whoever did this had planned it for months. Divers were sent into the icy waters. Boats circled the island. The currents were studied. Search parties spread across the coast. The first clue came on June 14th, 2 days later. A deflated raft was found on Angel Island, a few miles from Alcatraz. It looked like the one described by other inmates. Nearby, investigators found footprints leading away from the shore. Theories bloomed. Had they made it? Were they dead? The water was cold, but not impossible. Some experts believed they could have survived. Others said they drowned, their bodies pulled out to sea. But no bodies were found. No belongings, no sightings. It was as if they had vanished. Back at the prison, the escape was a shockwave. Inmates whispered in awe. Guards doubled their watch. The warden ordered inspections of every cell. New safety measures were introduced. The myth of Alcatraz invincibility had been shattered. The public was stunned. News spread like wildfire. Newspapers called it the greatest prison break in U.S. history. Television shows ran segments on it. Everyone had an opinion. Some saw the men as heroes. Others called them monsters. But one thing was certain. They had done the impossible. The FBI launched a full-scale manhunt. Posters were printed. Families were questioned. Every lead was followed. But the trail grew cold. The escapees had left behind no clues, just questions. And the biggest question of all, where were they? The manhunt, the FBI spared no resources. They launched an intensive nationwide search that spanned decades. Agents traveled across the country, interrogating the Anglin family, combing through records, tracking every possible lead. Their faces appeared on wanted posters, FBI files, and news broadcasts. Yet, not a single confirmed sighting was ever made. The first place the agents looked was the Anglin family home in Florida. It was a modest house tucked in a rural area. The family swore they hadn't seen or heard from John or Clarence. Agents searched the house, tapped the phones, and followed relatives for years. But they found nothing. Next came the waterways. Navy specialists studied the tides of San Francisco Bay. Some claimed that the timing of the escape matched a rare slack tide when currents were weakest. It was possible, they said, for a skilled swimmer to make it to land. The direction of the footprints on Angel Island supported that theory. But without more evidence, it remained just that, a theory. Rumors sprang up like wildfire. A fisherman claimed to have seen 3 men paddling toward Marin Headlands the night of the escape. A truck driver reported picking up hitchhikers matching their descriptions. Others said they had been spotted in Mexico, Brazil, even South Africa. None of the tips could be confirmed. One theory suggested the men had made it to South America. The Anglin brothers had distant relatives in Brazil. The FBI checked passports, flight records, and international contacts. Again, no evidence surfaced. It was as if the men had simply disappeared into thin air. Decades passed. In 1979, the case was reopened briefly when an inmate claimed he helped with the escape and had stayed behind. He said the others survived and fled to South America, but his story lacked detail and evidence. The FBI noted it, then moved on. In 2013, a letter surfaced, allegedly written by John Anglin. It claimed the escape had succeeded and that all 3 men had survived. The letter asked for a deal, medical care in exchange for surrender. The handwriting was analyzed. DNA testing was attempted. The FBI labeled it inconclusive. Meanwhile, the Anglin family remained tight-lipped. Over the years, they hinted that the brothers might have contacted them. One relative even showed Christmas cards signed by John and Clarence, dated after 1962. But no one could confirm their authenticity. The FBI couldn't verify them either. The investigation stayed open. Even in the 2000s, the FBI continued to chase leads. Age-progressed photos were created. Tips were still taken seriously. But the trail grew colder with every passing year. Despite it all, the case remains open. As far as the U.S. Marshals are concerned, Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers are still fugitives. Theories and doubts as the years passed, the mystery only deepened. Every few years, new theories emerged, each more intriguing than the last. People couldn't let go of the question: did Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers survive? The debate became part of pop culture, history, and conspiracy lore. Some experts insisted the men had died in the bay. They pointed to the freezing temperatures, the powerful currents, and the fact that no bodies had ever turned up. They argued that even Olympic swimmers would have struggled in those waters. The raft, they claimed, probably broke apart. The escapees either drowned or succumbed to hypothermia. But skeptics weren't convinced. Others believed the escape was too well planned to fail. They noted the raft was found intact. Footprints were discovered. Eyewitness reports, though unconfirmed, pointed to sightings across California and beyond. Some argue the FBI had too much invested in the legend of Alcatraz to admit someone beat the system. Maybe they had survived, but the truth was buried to protect reputations. Then there were the amateur sleuths, retired cops, historians, and curious minds who kept digging. Some analyzed maps, wind patterns, and tide charts. Others tracked down living relatives, convinced they knew something. Several TV documentaries and books reignited interest in the case. Everyone had a theory, but none had proof. One of the most persistent theories came from the Anglin family. Over the years, they released photos they claimed showed the brothers alive in Brazil in the 1970s. One photo showed 2 men standing next to a farm truck. Facial recognition experts were brought in. The results were inconclusive. Still, it gave new life to the belief that the men had escaped successfully and started over in another land. In 2015, a History Channel documentary revealed that a friend of the Anglin family had traveled to Brazil and claimed to have met the brothers. He described them in detail, even claiming to have taken a photograph with them. The FBI acknowledged the report, but could not verify it. Critics called it a hoax. Believers said it was the truth finally breaking through. Some conspiracy theorists went further. They suggested the escapees had been secretly captured, interrogated by the government, or entered witness protection. One wild theory even claimed that they had worked for intelligence agencies after their escape. Though far-fetched, such ideas highlighted the enduring fascination with the case. To this day, no bones, no clear photographs, and no final answers have emerged. The mystery remains intact. The uncertainty keeps the story alive, feeding both doubt and wonder. The escape from Alcatraz was no longer just a historical event. It had become a legend. And legends, by their nature, refuse to die. A legend is born. The escape from Alcatraz didn't just stir headlines. It etched itself into the cultural memory of a nation. Over time, it became more than a prison break. It was a symbol of ingenuity, rebellion, and the unbreakable human spirit. Books, films, songs, and documentaries ensured that the story stayed alive in the minds of millions. One of the earliest cultural reactions came from newspapers and magazines. They painted the escapees as masterminds, even anti-heroes. Journalists described Frank Morris as a criminal genius and the Anglin brothers as folk legends. The narrative spread quickly, and soon the public wasn't just curious, they were obsessed. Hollywood took notice. In 1979, Clint Eastwood starred in the now iconic film, Escape from Alcatraz. It dramatized the true story with gripping realism and added fuel to the mystery. The film portrayed the prisoners not as cold-blooded criminals, but as clever, determined men who beat an unbeatable system. The final scene, the empty cell, the raft, the uncertainty, left audiences questioning everything. TV shows followed suit. Documentaries aired on national networks. Specials featured dramatic recreations of the escape and interviews with experts, prison guards, and surviving relatives. Each retelling added layers of fascination. The public couldn't get enough. The myth of Alcatraz itself grew alongside the story. Tourists began flocking to the island in the 1980s after the prison was turned into a national historic site. Guides led people through the same cells the escapees once occupied. Visitors stood in the same showers, peered through the same bars, and stared into the dark holes in the walls. The energy in those spaces was almost sacred, as if the spirit of the escape still lingered. Even in classrooms, the story made its way into history books and lectures. Teachers used it to explore the psychology of confinement, the mechanics of planning, and the moral questions surrounding crime and justice. Students debated whether the escapees were villains or visionaries. The case became more than history. It became a lesson. Pop culture references continued to pop up. Songs, podcasts, and web series re-examined the escape. Each new generation discovered the story with fresh eyes. For many, it was their first glimpse into the power of human resilience and the thrill of the unknown. What made the Alcatraz escape so captivating wasn't just the action or the suspense. It was the ambiguity. The ending remained unwritten. And in that uncertainty, people found room to dream, to speculate, and to imagine a different kind of justice. Through it all, Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers became more than fugitives. They became legends, ghosts of history, still echoing across the cold waters of the bay. Echoes on the island today, Alcatraz stands as both a monument to history and a museum of mystery. The cold stone walls that once held some of America's most dangerous criminals now echo with the footsteps of tourists. The cells are no longer locked. The silence is broken by guides telling stories, stories of confinement, control, and most of all, escape. The prison was officially closed in 1963, less than a year after the infamous escape. The cost of running it had grown too high, and the island's decay was becoming unmanageable. But the escape had already sealed Alcatraz's place in American lore. When the gates closed for good, the legend began to grow. In 1973, the island opened to the public under the management of the National Park Service. It quickly became one of the most visited landmarks in the country. Visitors came not just to see where Al Capone played banjo or Machine Gun Kelly spent his days. They came to walk in the footsteps of Morris and the Anglin brothers. The cells involved in the escape were preserved. Tourists line up to peer into Frank Morris's tiny room, eyes widening as they see the hole in the back wall and the replica dummy head lying on the pillow. Guides explain how spoons and glue defeated a fortress. People listen with some whispering that maybe, just maybe, they made it. Alcatraz became more than a prison museum. It became a place of questions. What does it mean to be free? Can you cage the human spirit? How much planning, intelligence, and willpower does it take to outsmart a system designed to break you? The escape made people think. It made them feel. Events are held on the island each year, including marathons and swimming challenges that mirror the journey the escapees might have taken. These events prove that the swim is survivable, even by amateurs. Every finisher adds another crack to the belief that the escapees drowned. Artists, writers, and filmmakers continue to draw inspiration from the island. Alcatraz has become a canvas for stories of rebellion, redemption, and reinvention. The line between truth and fiction blurs easily here. And maybe that's part of the magic. Even the guards who once worked at Alcatraz, now old men, sometimes return to speak. Some express admiration for the escapees, others disdain. But none deny the boldness of what happened that night in June 1962. It changed their lives and the legacy of the island forever. Alcatraz today is a place where history lives in shadow and silence. The sea still crashes against its cliffs. The fog still rolls in thick and heavy. And somewhere in that mist, the spirit of the escape still drifts, unseen, unanswered, unforgettable. The final question time has a way of softening even the sharpest edges of history. Yet the story of the Alcatraz escape refuses to fade. Decades later, it remains as powerful, perplexing, and provocative as ever. With every passing year, the line between truth and legend grows thinner, but the fascination only deepens. Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers were never found. Not dead, not alive, just gone. Their vanishing act still haunts investigators, historians, and curious minds across the world. Were they buried in the cold depths of the bay? Or are they old men who once smiled at the world from behind new names and quiet lives. For law enforcement, the escape remains an open wound. Officially, they are fugitives, unsolved, unpunished. The U.S. Marshal Service still holds active warrants, technically keeping the case alive. But privately, many admit the truth may never be known. And maybe that's why it still matters. For the public, the escape has become something larger. It speaks to the endless tug between authority and rebellion, between confinement and freedom, between certainty and mystery. Whether viewed as criminals or folk heroes, Frank, John, and Clarence have etched themselves into the soul of American folklore. Children learn about them not from textbooks, but through whispered stories, schoolyard myths, and museum tours. Adults argue about the science, the strategy, the psychology. Everyone, it seems, has an opinion, and no one has the answer. Each anniversary of the escape brings fresh interest. Articles resurface, TV specials replay, theories reignite. New evidence is hinted at, but the truth remains just out of reach. Alcatraz watches silently from its place in the bay, its stone walls sheltering secrets no one can quite unlock. Perhaps that is what gives the story its power. The idea that three ordinary men locked away on the most fortified island in America refused to accept their fate. That they planned, endured, and risked everything for the faint hope of freedom. That they might have succeeded. And so, the final question remains. Did they make it? The answer lies somewhere beyond the waves, beneath the fog, or perhaps in a quiet town where three old men once laughed at the greatest escape the world has ever known. Whatever the truth, one thing is clear. The escape from Alcatraz wasn't just a moment in history. It became a legend. And legends live forever.